All right, guys, we knew going into this weekend that the lightweight division had options and there would be a shakeup in that division. What we didn't know was that the shakeup would come from outside the fighters competing at UFC 300. UFC president Dana White, who never likes to matchmake after fights, did exactly that when he announced that Islam Makhachev would defend his lightweight title versus Dustin Poirier at UFC 302. That's June 1st, folks. It's in Newark, New Jersey. And later that month, Conor McGregor would face Michael Chandler at UFC 303. Quick note, that's at 170, but come on, these guys have fought at 155. They got huge history at 155, so I'm treating it that way. So let me ask you this. Fair or foul, this Makhachev and Poirier booking? Should the UFC have waited for the 300 results? Remember, Makhachev and Tsarukyan and Oliveira was a number one contender fight, and Gaethje, he beat Dustin Poirier last year to kind of cement his spot. And of course, because of injuries and other stuff that didn't happen, this fight happened. What's the deal here, Danny? Fair or foul with the UFC kind of doing that, that matchmaking there?
Foul. Now, I do have to mention that I believe this is right, and Mike, correct me if I'm wrong here. Arman Tsarukyan's manager said something that he was approached backstage before they announced that fight. This literally just came out recently. So
yeah, that's correct. He did say that, and I asked Dana at the press conference as well. I was like, "Did you have this fight made coming into tonight, or did you wait for the results?" And it sounded like they went to Tsarukyan and he declined the fight, and they went to Poirier and accepted, and then they announced it.
I'm going to put my tinfoil on my imaginary tinfoil hat here. Go conspiracy theory. I apologize for that, but I'm going to call BS on that. I'm going to call BS. I think it's probably Arman Tsarukyan's team kind of, playing company man and being okay. Yeah. Like we'll go along with this sort of narrative, but you're telling me that you just like that. You make Poirier versus Makhachev. Like, dude, these guys have been talking about fighting each other for like the longest time now, for like weeks. Sorry, but like if you're going to label a fight a title eliminator, that's what both fighters expect going into it. That's what the fans expect that's at stake. And it doesn't become a title eliminator, bro, unless there's injury. Like I have a problem with that, right? Like Khamzat Chimaev couldn't compete, right? He was injured. He had a hand injury. But in this case scenario, like, yeah, Tsarukyan almost got finished a couple of times without submission. He looked pretty fresh. He had said prior to the fight that he would be interested in doing a quick turnaround and fighting Islam Makhachev, no problem. And all of a sudden, the title eliminator, it's not so title eliminator now because Dustin Poirier will be fighting for the UFC lightweight belt. And I love Dustin Poirier, fantastic fighter. That's going to be a great fight as well. But I'm sorry, if you're going to label something title eliminator, it better be a damn title eliminator.
Well, that doesn't mean
more and more.
It doesn't mean that won't be Tsarukyan's next fight. He'll still probably fight for the title in Abu Dhabi, probably against Islam if and when he beats Poirier. So, like,
yeah, but it's still not the next guy. And look, Max Holloway got a huge win at 155 and the BMF belt. You got Conor McGregor fighting later that month at 170 against Michael Chandler. You're telling me that if Conor McGregor picks up a win, he's not going to surpass Tsarukyan and get a title shot?
It's definitely a risk. But if you're Tsarukyan too, he already lost to Islam once on short notice on his UFC debut. If you're him and you're looking at Islam thinking he's going to be the champ for a while, is it in your best interest to do a 7-week turnaround from this fight and maybe not put yourself in the most advantageous position in terms of trying to win that? And then you're screwed if you're 0-2 for Islam. So it is a tricky situation. I understand it all. This is like one of those things that we talk about all the time here, the timing versus the most deserving, right? Like UFC has this card. Islam wanted to fight there. As I talked to him about a few weeks ago, he didn't care who it was. And obviously we know Dustin Poirier is aware of the state of the lightweight division. He's not ignorant about how the sport works. So if they called him up and said, you want to take this fight, Arman just turned it down, he's saying hell yes. So it's just kind of a product of circumstance, but I think all these guys are going to get their chances.
We'll see. But I've seen, recently several title eliminators get labeled that and then not be that. So look, Khamzat Chimaev was supposed to fight for the belt, right? Like, and now he's fighting Robert Whittaker. Why isn't he next? Why isn't he just going up against the champion, Dricus du Plessis now? Like, I don't know. Maybe I'm a little bit old school, but like, it kind of loses meaning when you label these fights and then the next one doesn't end up being the winner.
You think the UFC should just clarify that even though this was at stake, that party turned it down so that the transparency's there, Danny? Is that what you're saying? Or
I just have a hard time believing that somebody turns down a fight and then within minutes you already have a title fight booked. And then keeping in mind that like the calendar made sense prior to UFC 300. They both had been talking about in the media that they wanted to fight each other. Big fight for Makhachev, big fight for Poirier. Like, I just feel like this was done before the event, in my opinion.
Stuff happens.
Yeah,
Remember when
hat off.
Remember when we had the draw between Jan Blachowicz and Ankalaev, and Dana White came to the press conference like 20 minutes later and announced Jamal Hill versus Glover Teixeira for like a few weeks later, and that was all done in the span of like 30 minutes. So these guys, when the UFC wants to move quick and make something happen, they can make it happen. And I guess we will ask. I'm of course going to try to talk to Dustin Poirier at some point soon here, and I'll ask him. I'll say, hey, bro, what happened here in terms of the timeline? Did they call you during the card between the time Armin won and by the time Dana showed at the press conference? And we'll get our answer, Danny. So just wait with anticipation over there.
Okay, fine.
Listen, how about this McGregor Chandler announcement as well? I know it's at 170, but I think it impacts lightweight, like Danny stated. If McGregor wins, it's going to be hard to deny him. Of course, McGregor's throwing out Edwards' name. And
let's keep it 100. If McGregor wins, he's getting the next title shot at 155.
Okay, all right. So
not at Holloway.
Maybe that could be an option too.
All right. Well, what do you think, Goes? Do you think this fight actually impacts 155? Let's get your opinion on this topic.
Hell yeah, it does. I mean, look, that's what the UFC has wanted all along, right? Anytime you can throw Conor McGregor into a situation like that, that's what they want. Why not? He's their biggest star. I don't like that it's at 170. You know, I think that's a clear advantage for him. It's a disadvantage for Michael Chandler. But you know, it is what it is. It's going to happen that way. And look, don't get it twisted. I'm kind of with Danny. I think if he does get a win, especially if he gets it kind of in a destructive fashion, which I don't think this is going to the judges, a KO, they'll probably try and pull that card. But I'll tell you what, pulling that card today is a lot easier to stomach than it would have been maybe a month ago, right? Like, look at some of the names that are out of the picture now. Oliveira's out of the picture. Gaethje's out of the picture. Poirier and Islam are going to fight each other. One of those guys is going to be out of the picture. So, like, I kind of get it. And every now and again, I'm okay with them doing this type of thing. It's just consistency. You can't do it all the time, right? Like Danny's saying, these title eliminators, every now and again, shit happens. We get it. But when you keep labeling things a certain way and you don't go that way, that's when it starts to feel weird and not feel like a true sport. But that's something that they're going to want to do with Michael Chandler and with Conor McGregor. I wouldn't be shocked to see him be next if he gets a win here.
Well, and I know it's kind of very inside baseball too, but it's known, right? Conor has 2 fights left on his UFC contract. You think they're giving him a title shot with 1 fight left? I think that's going to be what really depends. Maybe they would, because I don't know what potential champions language there would be in there, but that's assuming Conor wins, which if it was Conor McGregor versus Islam Makhachev, I think Conor would be a very steep betting underdog in that matchup. And then is the UFC going to let Conor, you know, fight a title fight with 1 fight left on his contract? I think you would need to do a new deal before they would move forward with that. So that's a huge piece of the puzzle here as well, in terms of him fighting for a belt coming off that. And I know that might not be the thing the fans want to hear, because they just want to talk about the matchups and stuff like that. But the business is just as relevant when it comes to all this, and especially with Conor McGregor.
Mike, you think with what, let's say they do not renegotiate, you think the UFC is more lenient in giving him a title shot, or no? Sounds like no.
You mean like, would they give him the shot if he didn't re-sign on his final fight? Yeah, I don't think so, right? Because then what? Unless like they felt so confident he was going to win, and then there's some champion clause that extends the contract and locks him in, but then you're obviously risking it. And we're talking about some very tough matchups here against Islam Makhachev, or you know, whoever it may be.
But so, I mean, if he's determined to try out free agency, you know, the UFC would ideally like to send him on a loss, right? Like lower down his stock if he's going to go to the competition. So it's like a win-win. I see it. If he beats Makhachev, there's probably some clause in there of championship clause that will tie him down. If he loses, well, McGregor's past his prime, this and that. I think you do not want to put him in a position against someone like, you know, like a non-title fight where he picks up a huge win and then walks out on top, right? Like, I mean, look how they try to kind of say goodbye to Nate Diaz, like with the whole setup with
Well,
Hamza.
we'll see
like,
a lot of that, right? It'll be a long wait. It'll
Yeah.
be Conor, like, they're keeping me on the shelf, a lot of stuff that we've seen. So it could be a year up until that point happens. And then who knows who fights in between then. I certainly know Islam Makhachev is going to sit around and wait for Conor McGregor.
Right. Hey, Mike, you brought up baseball. If you guys don't mind, I'd like to throw a curveball at you guys because this is something George and I were talking about. You like that? Something George and I were talking about on the radio show last night. With Conor McGregor, how would you almost advise this situation? Because if he does explore free agency, right? It's not like Conor McGregor is going to be fighting for very much longer. But if you look at the guys that are outside the UFC, Nate Diaz, you look at Jorge Masvidal, the Jake Paul's names always get thrown out, right? And boxing, stuff like that. Pacquiao. One of the best things that Floyd Mayweather ever did in his career was become his own promoter, right? That's something that I think the UFC would hate to see him go out and do that. At the same time, Conor McGregor probably loves being a UFC fighter, right? He's said that many times. What do you think the UFC would have to do to keep him other than money, right? Because they say it all the time. He's got money.
I think it's just more money, right? It's like he said before, he's like, I want equity, I want this, that. I don't think any of that stuff's happening. So they got to pay the bills. But I think Conor is just as curious. Like if you saw that interview he did with Ariel Helwani a few weeks ago, he was like, there's been no negotiations because I don't think the UFC even knows how to approach me to have a conversation like that at this point. But it's all coming together, man. Like the UFC, when they go into this TV rights negotiation with ESPN, coming up at the end of next year, they want Conor McGregor under contract. They want to be able to tell them, we have this guy, we're going to be able to sell pay-per-views on ESPN Plus. And, if it's not ESPN, if it's a Netflix, if it's whomever comes in the game trying to get UFC's rights, they want to be able to say Conor McGregor is a chit they have in their pocket to, lift up the brand and all that stuff. So I imagine he's not going to free agency. Like Dana, I think, said at the press conference on Saturday that Conor McGregor is going to fight here. He's going to retire here. Conor has said he's a UFC lifer, all that stuff. It seems like things are in a pretty decent spot between them right now. We'll see what happens in terms of the fight promotion. I don't know how thrilled Conor is with his big return being announced at the post-fight press conference at 2 a.m. from a crumpled up piece of paper that Dana White got handed mid-press conference. That whole thing was a little bit strange. I also understand the side of it of not wanting to take it away from the athletes at UFC 300 by announcing it on the broadcast. So whatever. I mean, the fight's going to be huge no matter how they announced it, but that whole thing was a little bit weird. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of moving parts with this for sure.
I think he wants what Francis stated, and that's the freedom to do something like that. But I think he'd also like to do it like he did it the one time. I'm going to fight Floyd and make a lot of money. I guess he'll have to cut a piece of the pie to the UFC, but also stay with the UFC. I believe him when he says, I love the UFC and I want to be with them. And I know Dana probably gets frustrated with Conor, but he never really puts him down. He always says he's the easiest to work with or whatever. I'm sure there's stuff that goes on there that he doesn't like hearing because Conor does know his worth. So I think that's what he wants goes is just if there's Saudi Arabia money that wants to pay me $100 million to box on some jabroni, right? I want to do that, but I'd like to stay with you guys too. Can we make that work? And so I think that's what's going to have to happen is the UFC is going to have to maybe work with him on an occasional fight. I don't think there's many of those left because this guy's already, how old is he, guys? 35, 36, McGregor, and he hasn't fought in almost 4 years. Right? Yeah, so, I mean, really, he's obviously past his prime. He can still sell. He still moves the needle. I get that part. But yeah, I think that's what he wants. He's been there and seen what Francis has done. And I think he's like, whoa, that's legit. Like, I want that because I know I can double that, triple that, or whatever. So I think it has probably something to do with that.
Yeah.
Guys, let's talk about the rest of the 55 division. The Tsarukyan thing, he declined. Obviously, as Mike pointed out, could he be next in October in Abu Dhabi? Possibly, yeah. Holloway, yes, he's a serious contender at 55, but I think the play is Poirier at 45 because, Poirier and Islam is already made. So let's talk about someone else that was on this card. I want to give him some love. Renato Moicano. Danny, talk about this guy. He is Money Moicano, and he came up with a big win. Turner thought he had walked off like a major leaguer, right, hitting a home run. And he admired his work for too long. The fight wasn't over, and Moicano comes back and beats him up. But he's on a quiet little streak of his own.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize it, but he's undefeated at lightweight in his past 5 fights. Some people might want to bring up the RDA fight, but that was at a catch weight of 160. Also a fight that he took on short notice. I believe it was like a week or something. So I kind of give him a pass for that one. But if you look at his latest run, like the guy has been putting together an impressive resume. At 155, he submitted Jai Herbert, he submitted Alexander Hernandez, submitted Brad Riddell, decision Drew Dober, and now TKO Jalen Turner. Man, that's quite the run right there. I think Moicano at 34 years of age is primed for a big opportunity. He's not getting any younger. His days as a top lightweight or being as a top athlete are probably numbered. So I'd like to see him get a good opportunity because I do feel like he's a dark horse in the division. I do feel like he can do some big stuff. And I do feel like he could be a bit of a star, like maybe not reach the Conor McGregor levels, but shit, I can see him, headlining some fight nights and whatnot, given the right matchup. So I don't know. I'd like to see him get a big name. I think Dan Hooker would be a great fighter. I don't know, Beneil Dariush, but somebody with a name and a good card placement as well. Moicano at this point deserves it. He's playing ball with the UFC, being a great promoter. I think it's time that he gets a big shot.
Against Patty, or is that does that one go to Bobby Green?
I think that's more of a Bobby Green thing, but I wouldn't hate it if Moicano gets booked against Patty. I just think that's a far less competitive fight, in my opinion.
Chris Goes Wild in the chat says Moicano has the best promo. Anytime he wants the mic, give it to him. Another 55 bout finances. Jim Miller versus Bobby Green. Talk about that fight goes. I think it broke your heart a little bit. We never really side with each guy other than on staff picks. And both we've covered for a long time, but it is kind of sucks to see someone just kind of get a whooping like Miller got on Saturday night.
Yeah, it kind of was that. I mean, look, Bobby Green fought a great fight. He had an excellent game plan. He stuck to it. He never deviated from it. There'd probably be a lot more W's on his record if he were able to fight every fight like that, right? Stick to that game plan and just do that over and over. Every time Miller even got close, there was a jab just waiting for him, and that face was so busted up. Jim Miller's a stud. Look, he's been doing this for a long time. I hope he takes a second look at what happened on Saturday night. I'm not saying retire. I'm just saying maybe take a seat. And at this point, I think he's maybe earned the opportunity to say, this is the name, this is the location, this will be my last stand. Something like that, right? Because that was a tough one to watch for him. He took a beating from Bobby Green.
Yeah, his streak that he had is over. So I think what a lot of fighters commonly say is, when I know I can't compete at a high level, that's the time where I really need to start thinking about, putting it down. And no disrespect to Green, but he's not a top 5 lightweight. He might not even be a top 10 lightweight. And he really put it on Jim Miller. And Jim Miller's accomplished so much. I just don't see how he doesn't go into the UFC Hall of Fame one day because of the records he has. But I think it was Mike that pointed out this guy's still, what's he want to get to? 50 fights, Mike? I think he said, or something like that.
Yeah, maybe something like that. I think this was at 44, so that maybe is a little bit of a stretch now, especially the damage that he took here. And I see Scott Christian in the chat saying, I can't figure out why Miller didn't attempt more takedowns. I think there was about 300,000 reasons why he didn't attempt more takedowns in this fight. But yeah, that was rough to watch. And credit to Bobby Green though, man. Like I was worried about him too coming into this fight after that loss to Jalen Turner. He got the crap beat out of him, and the ref almost let him die in there. So for him to come back and stand in there, he took some big shots to fight that same style with his hands low. He didn't let that change him at all. So credit to him for that.
Hey, this just came to mind. Patty Pimblett, Jim Miller.
It's great fight.
I'm okay with it.
It'll be fun.
I'm okay with it. Hey, Josh Golden saying over and over that Miller isn't UFC Hall of Fame. Would you guys think he's UFC Hall of Fame, Jim Miller?
I'm not ready to have this conversation again. Let's save this for the next fight. I can't do this. Bring on Daniel Cormier. Ask what he thinks.